Imagine a woman, perhaps in a dusty village square, or at the edge of a roaring river, or maybe even in the confines of her own home, facing a crowd that is turned into judge, jury, and executioner. Her crime, as they see it, is a violation of an unspoken pact, a breach of faith that somehow transcends personal betrayal to become a public offense. She is accused of adultery, and her fate is rarely, if ever, decided by compassion. It is almost always a spectacle, a brutal testament to societal control and the relentless weight of perceived female transgression. For millennia, across continents and through radically different cultures, the charge of adultery against a woman wasn't just a legal matter, it was often a death sentence, a public humiliation designed to strip away every shred of her dignity, or a banishment that left her a pariah, literally erased from the social fabric. Her life, her very being, could be extinguished, sometimes for little more than a whisper, a rumor, or the convenient accusation of a jealous or vengeful husband. What happened to these women? The answer is a grim, sprawling mosaic of human cruelty, deeply rooted in patriarchal power structures that saw women as property, their bodies as vessels for male lineage, and their sexuality as a dangerous force requiring absolute containment. If the thought of such ingrained injustice makes your blood boil, and you're eager to uncover more of these hidden, often horrifying historical truths, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep bringing these untold stories to light. From the sun-baked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where laws were first chiseled into stone, to the frigid colonial outposts of Puritan New England, the accusation of an adulterous woman ignited a terrifying cascade of consequences. The details changed, yes, the specific methods of punishment, the rituals surrounding the accusation, the very definition of the crime itself. But the underlying current remained disturbingly consistent. A woman's life hung by the thinnest of threads, vulnerable to charges that a man in a similar situation would almost certainly escape. It's a chilling uniformity in human history. The woman's body is the vessel of shame, the man's often absolved. Consider the earliest legal codes we have access to, like the Code of Hammurabi, dating back to around 1754 BC. Here, in the heart of ancient Babylon, if a married woman was caught with another man, both were bound and thrown into the river. A trial by ordeal. If they drowned, they were guilty. If they survived, presumed innocent, though survival itself was far from guaranteed against the currents and the judgment of the gods. But notice the immediate bias. The law also states that if a husband, in the case of his wife's adultery, wished to spare her life, he could appeal to the king, who might then spare both the wife and her lover. Yet, the woman had no such reciprocal power to spare her husband if he were found with another woman. The burden of fidelity, the ultimate cost of its breach, rested almost entirely on her shoulders. Her husband could take a second wife, could engage with enslaved women or concubines without legal repercussions, his status, his honor, untouched. Her perceived transgression, however, struck at the very root of his patriarchal authority, threatening the purity of his lineage and the stability of his household. It wasn't about love or betrayal in the emotional sense. It was about property and control. Move eastward, across the sands, to ancient Israel, where the Mosaic law, laid out in the Old Testament, prescribed a stark and brutal punishment for adultery. Stoning Deuteronomy 22:22 declares, "If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die, the man and the woman with whom he lay. So you shall purge the evil from Israel." This sounds equal on the surface, but context is everything. The definition of adultery often focused on a married woman having sex with any man, while a married man could have sex with unmarried women, concubines, or even prostitutes without committing what the law considered adultery in the same punishable sense. The legal emphasis was on the infringement of another man's property rights, the wife, rather than the man's breach of marital vows. If a woman was a virgin betrothed to a man, and she was found to have had sex with another man in the city, both were to be stoned to death at the city gate. If it happened in the country, only the man was to be killed, because it was assumed she cried out for help and there was no one to rescue her. Again, the focus was on her perceived consent or lack thereof, rather than the male partner's responsibility. The accusation itself could lead to a public test, a ritual involving a bitter water in Numbers 5, where a priest would make a woman drink a potion. If she was guilty, her belly would swell, and her thigh would rot. If innocent, she would be cleared a terrifying psychological ordeal, leaving her fate to superstition and physical reaction, often in a society where her word meant little against an accusation. And what about ancient Greece and Rome? Did their sophisticated philosophies and burgeoning legal systems offer a kinder path? Not necessarily for women. In Republican Rome, for instance, adultery was largely a private matter, dealt with by the family. A father could kill his daughter and her adulterous lover if he caught them in flagrante delicto. In his own house, a husband had similar rights, though his powers were curtailed by Augustus, who criminalized adultery in 18 BC, making it a public offense. The Lex Julia de Adulterius Coercendus codified severe punishments. An adulterous wife would lose half her dowry and a third of her property, be exiled to an island, and be forbidden to remarry. Her male partner also faced exile and confiscation of property. However, a man's infidelity with an unmarried woman, an enslaved woman, or a prostitute was not considered adultery. The law was, once again, about a married woman's fidelity to her husband and the upholding of patriarchal property rights and social order. The moral outrage, the legal machinery, swung into full, crushing force against the woman. Fast forward to medieval Europe, where the intertwining of secular law and canon law, the law of the church, created a complex and often contradictory system. Adultery was deemed a sin by the church, a violation of God's commandments, and could lead to penance, excommunication, or public shaming. Secular courts often imposed far harsher penalties. In some regions, a woman accused of adultery might be branded, her nose cut off, or even drowned. Public penance was common. Forced to stand at the church door during services, wearing a white sheet, holding a candle, confessing her sin. This wasn't just about spiritual purification. It was a devastating assault on her social standing, marking her as tainted, forever shamed in the eyes of her community. Her reputation, once lost, was irretrievable. She might lose her dowry, her property rights, and her children, effectively rendering her destitute and powerless. The methods became increasingly inventive in their cruelty. In some Germanic laws, a woman caught in adultery could be stripped naked and whipped through the village. The cucking stool, or ducking stool, became a popular method of public humiliation in England for various offenses, including perceived moral laxity, often reserved for women. She would be strapped into a chair and paraded through the streets, then submerged into a pond or river. It was a spectacle, a theatrical display of communal vengeance, designed to entertain as much as to punish, solidifying the idea that her transgression was not just against her husband, but against the entire social order. And this punitive trajectory didn't simply fade with the Enlightenment. In many ways it found new, stark expressions. Consider the Puritan colonies of early America. Their rigid moral codes, deeply rooted in biblical interpretation, viewed adultery with extreme gravity. While their laws theoretically prescribed death for both parties, in practice, men often escaped with lighter sentences, while women bore the brunt. Public shaming was paramount. The most famous literary example, Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, depicts Hester Prynne forced to wear a scarlet A on her chest, a permanent badge of shame, ostracized by her community. This wasn't just fiction. It mirrored actual practices. Records show women forced to stand on gallows with ropes around their necks, branded on the forehead with AD, or publicly whipped. The objective was absolute moral conformity, and deviation by women was seen as a profound threat to the fragile stability of their God-fearing communities. The accusation could come from anyone, a neighbor, a busybody, a discarded lover, and the burden of disproving it was often insurmountable for a woman with little social standing or legal recourse. It's a chilling uniformity in human history. The woman's body as the vessel of shame, the man's often absolved. If you're finding this deep dive into historical injustices compelling, and it makes you reflect on how far society has, or hasn't, truly come, then please, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. We want to know what you think. Across the vast Islamic world, the concept of zina, unlawful sexual intercourse, is unequivocally condemned in the Quran Sharia law, derived from the Quran and the Sunnah, the teachings and practices of the Prophet Muhammad. prescribed severe punishments, including stoning to death for adultery. However, the legal hurdles for proving Zina are incredibly high. For stoning, rajam, to be lawfully applied, 4 adult male Muslim witnesses must testify to having seen the act of penetration unequivocally, with no room for doubt or interpretation. A false accusation, qadaf, without this incredibly rigorous standard of proof is itself a punishable offense, carrying 80 lashes. In practice, due to this incredibly high bar, convictions for zina leading to stoning have historically been rare in most classical Islamic legal systems. Yet the existence of the law and the occasional, often controversial application in some modern, religiously conservative societies, particularly against women, highlights the continuing shadow of perceived female transgression. What often occurs, instead of legal stoning, are cases where confessions are extracted under duress, or where cultural norms, rather than strict legal interpretation, lead to honor killings, a horrifying extrajudicial practice where a woman is murdered by her family for bringing dishonor upon them through alleged zina, or even just suspicion of it. From the elaborate ritual of the bitter water in ancient Israel, to the public whippings of medieval Europe, to the scarlet letters of colonial America, to the stoning sentences, however rarely applied, under certain interpretations of Sharia, the thread is undeniable. Women accused of adultery faced fates ranging from systematic humiliation and economic ruin to agonizing public death. Their lives were reduced to cautionary tales, their bodies used as canvases for societal fear and control. The very definition of their crime was often a social construct, designed to protect male lineage, preserve male honor, and enforce a rigid social hierarchy where women occupied a subordinate, vulnerable position. The legal, social, and religious machinery of countless civilizations was consistently geared towards policing female sexuality, ensuring its strict containment within marriage, or annihilating it entirely when perceived to stray. It was rarely about justice as we might conceive it today. It was about power, purity, and profound prejudice. What other forgotten corners of history, or continuing injustices, should we bring into the light? Tell us in the comments below.